ever forget. I have met regularly and recently with representatives and will continue to do so, and I would love to visit her constituency.
Rachel Gilmore.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In Devon and Somerset, we are home to some of the finest units in British Armed Forces, from Devonport to Lympstone to 40 Commando at Norton Manor and to Royal Marine Base Chivener in North Devon. But, Mr Speaker, the geopolitical tectonic plates are shifting, and Mr President Trump's latest comments about NATO only underline the importance of a strong UK defence capability and strategic autonomy. It is often said that if you want peace, then you must prepare for war. So after years in which successive Conservative governments hollowed out our armed forces, could the Minister outline how the government intends, QED, to ensure that this country is properly equipped to defend itself in the event of a major conflict?
Minister.
Yes, Mr Speaker, £8 billion in our...
I think the answers will come from the government side, not the opposition.
£8 billion more in our first year into defence than the last year under the Conservative government, a total of £270 billion into defence in this Parliament alone, and a vision for the next 10 years set out in our Strategic Defence Review.
Michael Payne.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. In just 18 months, this government has ended a disastrous 1996 Tory privatisation of military housing, which cost the taxpayer billions. We've repaired 1,000 military homes in the poorest condition ahead of schedule, and we've kick-started a landmark £9 billion repair and renewal of 36,000 Forces homes. Does the Minister agree with me that this is more action in 18 months than the last lot managed in 14 years?
It's an easy question.
Mr Speaker, the last government had 14 years to fix defence family housing and failed, delivering instead record low levels of satisfaction. We have reversed that disastrous privatisation of our military housing, and we have a landmark housing strategy to renew or repair 9 in 10 homes, and we are creating a new defence housing service. That is how you put the interests of British service personnel first.
Ben Simmons.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My constituent, Vijay Odedra, has been telling me how his small business, Capno Trainer, has been working with the Royal Navy to improve the fighting capacity and resilience of our sailors. So whilst we wait for the Defence Investment Plan, can the Secretary of State tell us what steps he has in mind to harness the innovation in our SME sector?
Minister.
Well, welcome in promoting a defence SME. There's defence SMEs in every constituency doing a good job. That's why we created the Defence Office of Small Business Growth to support more SMEs gaining defence contracts and increasing the direct spend that the MOD has with them. Very happy meeting him to discuss the SME he mentioned.
Jane Kirkham.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The ONS have confirmed they're considering taking the veteran question off the census for 2031. Witnesses at the Armed Forces Bill Committee clearly thought that question provides very important data about where our veterans are. Will the Minister or the Secretary of State engage with the ONS to emphasise the importance of the veterans question?
Minister.
My honourable friend is exactly right to point out just how valuable that question. It should be asked. It is absolutely valuable in setting data for us to go forward. I have and will absolutely take this up.
Otsella Chance.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In 2020, the now Prime Minister proposed legislation to ensure that any UK military action could only take place if there were a legal justification, a viable objective and the consent of the Commons. Can I ask the Secretary of State, does he endorse those principles outlined by his party leader, and will he therefore support my Armed Conflict Requirements Bill?
Mr Speaker, I'm very happy to have a look at our Armed Forces Conflict Bill, but the Prime Minister in recent weeks has reasserted exactly the basis on which any UK military forces are committed into conflict.
Dr Peter Prince.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So many United States service personnel from RAF Lakenheath and RAF Mildenhall live off-base in Bury St Edmunds. 3 planes from Lakenheath were shot down in friendly fire over Kuwait last week. Fortunately, the pilots were rescued. Mildenhall is the home to a large fleet of aerial refuelling tankers. I don't know if it was a tanker from Mildenhall that was lost, but I do know there are 6 grieving families right now. Will the Minister join me in extending our support and sincere condolences to our brave United States families wherever they are in our thoughts.
Who wants it? Secretary of State.
I will indeed, Mr Speaker. My honourable friend speaks for the House, and it is a message that I made sure the Secretary for War, Pete Hegseth, had from me direct on behalf of the UK people.
John Glenn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Secretary of State is a former distinguished Treasury Minister, and government is about taking decisions when things change. Now, it's welcome that the Chancellor has addressed the heating oil crisis, but what will the Secretary of State do to make the Chancellor come to terms with the changes over the last few weeks to provide some additional support so the Defence Investment Plan will do justice to his ambitions?
Secretary of State.
Well, the right honourable gentleman is right about the rising demands on defence. It was reflected in the Prime Minister's speech last month to the Munich conference, in which he said hard power is the currency of the age, and we know that we need to spend more faster.
Burton Sampson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last month I joined several members from across this House in Ukraine for the 4th anniversary since Putin's illegal invasion, and the mood was very different to the previous year after an extremely harsh winter and Putin's bombardment of the power networks. Can he give assurances that not only will we stand by Ukraine with everything going on in the Middle East, but we'll also help them and support them in fixing key infrastructure so that 400,000 people are not living without power in Kyiv?
Thursday.
My honourable friend is right, and I welcome the visit that he paid to Ukraine. We are indeed doing what we can to help Ukraine defend its critical civilian infrastructure targeted by Putin, and we are indeed stepping up our support, our military support to Ukraine in the way that I've reported to the House today.
Wendy Morton.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I've just returned from visiting Ukraine last week, and it's very clear to me that Ukraine still needs help with procurement of missiles, interceptors and sanctions on the Shadow Fleet. But the role of the US also remains critical as well. So I'd just like to ask the Minister if he thinks that it really helps persuade the US to stay strong on Ukraine when, as a close ally of ours, the UK U-turns over the use of our air bases to attack Iran.
State.
Well, the decision to accept the fresh US request to use our bases to strike the missile locations of Iran was clearly set out at the time. Just say to the Honourable Lady, I welcome, and the House welcomes, her visit to Ukraine, and this is enormously encouraging in supporting Ukraine to have members of this House from all sides regularly in Ukraine, reinforcing the support that this country continues to give to their fight against Putin.
Bacon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Following the welcome announcement of defence investment in Scotland last week, can the Minister provide an update on the plans to take forward programme Euston at Faz Lane? Does he agree that the skilled workforce at the Methil Yard in my constituency saved by this government will provide an excellent capacity to deliver this vital contract?
Can I thank him for his continuing advocacy? I've met him to discuss this, and I will no doubt meet him again very soon to discuss it. We'll continue to invest in our shipbuilding infrastructure across the UK, and as we approach decisions on Project Euston, we'll be sure to keep the House informed.
Danny Chambers.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. There's widespread concern about the government sticking to the decision made in 2016 to shut the Winchester Army Training Regiment. It trains 20% of our troops. Has there been an impact assessment on this, and have the government spoken to commanders at Purbright and at Winchester to ensure that they can not only maintain our training capacity but increase it if necessary?
Minister.
The government undertake very detailed impact work, and I can assure him that there is no impact to our training capability, and I'm pleased to say that we are increasing the number of people starting training, no thanks to the previous government.
Much, Mr Speaker. A new partnership between New College Lanarkshire and Cairnhill Structures, a steel fabricating company in Coatbridge, begins today. Engineering Futures aims to give local people a start in engineering and trades such as welding, fabrication and computer aid design, all essential to strengthening our skills base and increasing defence jobs. So what steps will my right honourable friend take to promote similar schemes across Scotland?
Well, can I praise New College Lancashire for their work? It's precisely the reason that we wanted to invest in not one but two Scottish Defence Technical Excellence Colleges, and I hope that the Scottish Government will be able to match that commitment that this Labour Government has made precisely to deliver for young people of Scotland as he has set out.
Final question, Harriet.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Further to the question from the Chair of the Energy Select Committee, energy infrastructure offshore needs protecting. The Strategic Defence Review did not mention specifically platforms, FPSOs or rigs, these movable assets. Can the Secretary of State or the Minister confirm that these will be considered in terms of our energy security, and what will the Defence Department do to ensure their security now and in the future?
On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, the Strategic Defence Review laid greater emphasis on the need to step up our homeland security and our homeland defence, and that includes the critical infrastructure under the sea on which we depend.
Point of order on questions. Ben Invest-Ejected.
Mr. Speaker, before the Defence Ministers leave their place, earlier on the Minister for Defence Readiness and Industry mentioned exercise Titan Storm in the context of Ajax. I asked a written question to the Department on the 1st of January, a name day question which was due for answer by the 7th of January, with regards to how many noise and vibration injuries have been sustained up to exercise Titan Storm. And I was wondering if I could ask for your advice as to how I can best elicit an answer now it's over 2 months late.
Front bench wants it? If not, I'll deal with it. Can I just say it's totally unacceptable that it's in the question. It's a name written day. It should be answered. I cannot believe that something that came in January has still not been answered. Can I ask that the Secretary of State looks into it and ensure that questions are answered? Isn't good enough. Members are representing their constituents. They have people who are serving, people who may be serving in this contract. Please, let's take this House more seriously. We're having a very bad time from government, who seems to have a total disregard for members of Parliament, which is totally unacceptable. Is it similar to the similar?
Mr. Speaker, can I thank you for your comments there? The next defence questions are going to be on the 10th of May, and obviously we're all aware of the recess, but given our armed forces personnel, many of them my constituents and represented across the House here, are going to be in harm's way during that period. Can I look to you, Mr. Speaker, as you always do, where necessary, for your urgent questions and particular statements to be given by the defence team in this period, because the 10th of May is a very, very long period of time, given we have armed forces personnel on duty right now.
Right, I'm not going to carry on the conversation. I think you put it on the record. Before we do come to the next item of business, I should note the recent death of Phil Wallace, who served as the Member of Parliament for Oldham East and Saddleworth between 1997 and 2010 and held several ministerial posts. Our thoughts are with Tracy, his sons, and the rest of the family and friends, and from all former colleagues. I know, and I've got to say to the Secretary of State for Defence how close you were, and I know, John, that you did and kept us all informed with your regular visits. It really was appreciated. Right, we now come to the next urgent question. Let the front bench change over. We come to the urgent question. Shadow Foreign Secretary Dame Priti Patel.
Mr. Speaker, to ask the Secretary of State for FCGO if she would make a statement on the steps she's taking to secure the reopening of the Straits of Hormuz.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the Shadow Foreign Secretary for her question. I should say first, Mr. Speaker, that the Foreign Secretary will provide a wider update to the House tomorrow morning on the UK's approach to the situation in the Middle East, including the conflict in Iran, escalation in Lebanon, our consular response and her diplomatic engagement, including her recent visit to Saudi Arabia over the weekend, which will provide the possibility for further questions on a much wider range of issues. Turning to the Right Honourable Lady's question, Iran's reckless actions in the Straits of Hormuz are having damaging consequences for the global economy and putting the lives of those aboard civilian vessels in danger. Iran has struck several commercial ships in the last few days. Its actions have put a fifth of the world's oil supply effectively on hold. And indeed, a ministerial colleague will shortly update the House on steps that this government is taking to provide help to those affected in the UK that most need it. Last week, we joined, Mr. Speaker, 31 other countries and the International Energy Agency in agreeing a coordinated release of 400 million barrels of oil, including 13.5 million barrels from the UK, the biggest ever release in the IEA's history. And, Mr Speaker, as the Prime Minister said this morning, we are working with all of our allies and partners, including our European partners, on how we can restore freedom of navigation in the region as quickly as possible and ease the economic impacts. That is not a simple task, Mr Speaker, but we have to reopen the Strait of Hormuz to ensure stability in the market. Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister spoke with President Trump yesterday on the importance of reopening the Strait of Hormuz. The Foreign Secretary was in Riyadh in recent days showing support for our partners across the region who face continuing strikes. She discussed the impact of Iran's actions with GCC foreign ministers and the importance of maintaining energy security and supply. And as we speak, she is on a call with Secretary of State Rubio on this very crisis. The Defence Secretary has just been answering questions, Mr Speaker, on these issues. And Mr Speaker, I can assure you and the whole House that the Government will continue to work towards a swift resolution of the situation in the Middle East to protect our people, our allies, and to reduce the cost of living for working people in this country.
Mr Speaker, this is a moment for Britain to stand tall and work intensively with our allies. With the despotic Iranian regime continuing to attack international shipping in the Straits of Hormuz, urgent action is required to reopen safe shipping routes, to protect lives and to support trade and economic stability. We all feel the economic cost of Iran's actions, and this morning the Prime Minister told the press, and not the House, Mr Speaker, that we are working with all our allies to bring together a viable collective plan that can restore freedom of navigation in the region as quickly as possible. Now, recognising that this is not straightforward, where is this plan and what measures are being considered? The British public, Mr Speaker, need to know what the government is doing to protect our economic and national security. There are currently no destroyers in the Middle East. These can operate at a very long range and can take down projectiles. They can also provide cover for mine hunter vessels. When will the government send one? Under this government, there are also no mine hunters at our naval base in Bahrain, a base designed to host a fleet of mine hunters. Is the government urgently working to bring mine hunters back to Bahrain to strengthen capacity and capabilities at that base and in the region? Is the government working with our allies to assess the viability of striking targets that threaten international shipping, just as happened against the Houthi targets in Yemen? What action is being taken to protect critics of the Iranian regime and journalists from acts of transnational repression from the IRGC? Will the government lead a diplomatic effort to ensure that Russia does not profit from this crisis? And will the Minister reaffirm that Britain will continue going further in its actions on Russia and oil refineries fueling this war? With our friends in the Gulf, who are being so brazenly under attack from Iran, what assurances did the Foreign Secretary give them on her visit about Britain's presence in the region and actions to protect our bases? And did she make any progress on increasing the number of British nationals who can return home, bear in mind the disruption to flights that have taken place today? Mr Speaker, this is a hugely consequential moment for the world, and Britain cannot stand by and sit on the fence.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. And she asks very important questions, both about the safety of British nationals, our allies and others, and of course the impact economically. And she rightly raises the situation in relation to Russia and Ukraine. And of course we cannot allow this situation to become a bonanza in any way for Putin in his war against Ukraine. And that is why we are absolutely committed, I can assure her, to continuing our economic pressure on Russia. And I spoke to my Ukrainian counterpart just last week to reassure him of that. The Prime Minister set out very clearly, Mr Speaker, that the Straits of Hormuz are vital. They're vital to the international economy and to security. We're in continued conversations with European allies and with the United States. These questions are, Mr Speaker, very complex. Any plans must be multilateral, with as many nations as possible taking part. And I'm obviously not going to get into detailed discussions here, but the Defence Secretary has already said about the resources that we pre-positioned in the region. The Prime Minister has been clear about that, as have I and the Foreign Secretary. And indeed, there are capabilities such as autonomous mine hunting capabilities and others. But we already, of course, as I said, have been taking substantial actions to support allies and partners. And indeed, the GCC set out very clearly after their meeting with the Foreign Secretary that they thanked the UK for our solidarity with the countries of the GCC and our strong and long-standing commitment to their security, stability and territorial integrity. That was it from the statement issued by the ministers after they met the Foreign Secretary. Secretary at the weekend. Mr Speaker, we've been very clear about our objectives. Firstly, that is to protect our people in the region. Secondly, whilst taking the necessary action to defend ourselves and our allies, we will not be drawn into the wider war. We will continue working to a swift resolution that brings security and stability back to the region, but also crucially stops the Iranian threats to its neighbours. We all want to see an end to this war as quickly as possible, because obviously the longer it goes on, the more dangerous the situation becomes, and the worse it is for the cost of living back here at home. And that is exactly why the Prime Minister has set out decisive action today on the measures that we are taking to support UK citizens who be affected with energy prices, and whether that's on the heating oil issue, which a ministerial colleague will be speaking on shortly, whether that's on the energy price cap, whether that's in our continued investment in energy security and capability here in the UK. We cannot allow ourselves to be at the whims of whether it's the Ayatollahs or indeed Vladimir Putin when it comes to our energy security. We've already acted alongside other countries to release those emergency oil stocks, which are set at a level that is completely unprecedented. But of course, we ultimately do have to reopen the Straits of Hormuz to ensure stability in the market, but that isn't a simple task. So I repeat again, we're going to work with allies, including European partners, to bring together a viable and collective plan to restore freedom of navigation.
Mike Kane.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Joint Maritime Security Centre has designated the Persian Gulf situation as critical. Nautilus, RMT and the Chamber of Shipping have designated the Straits of Hormuz, the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman as a warlike area way into next month. Protecting the safety of seafarers and UK-flagged vessels is paramount. Will the Minister continue to commit to upholding the International Convention for Safety of Life at Sea?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to raise these issues, and the extraordinary, reckless actions that Iran has been taking are not only risking and threatening those international shipping routes, but also the crews serving on board those vessels, I think should be foremost in all of our minds. And indeed, coming from a city with a proud merchant navy tradition, I'm only too aware of the sacrifices across multiple generations. I've been speaking closely with a range of partners, including across the Mediterranean in recent days, with our partners in Malta and Cyprus and Greece and elsewhere. And I know we're working very, very closely through the Department for Transport and other agencies to ensure that safety and security of shipping is maintained and restored.
Callum Miller, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Households across the UK are fearful of rising prices at the pumps and to heat their homes. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz by Iran will worsen the serious situation, yet it should have come as no surprise. And in response, President Trump's position is both irresponsible and inconsistent. 1 week, he says he has no need for UK warships to support his unilateral action because he has already won. The next, he says we must send ships. One day, he suspends sanctions on Russian oil in a desperate, dangerous attempt to bring down oil prices. The next, he says he might bomb the Iranian facility at Karg Island for fun. The UK should be leading on the world stage at a time like this, not following Trump like a poodle, nor succumbing to his bullying, as the Conservatives and Reform Party have advocated. So can the Minister state what specific actions the UK is taking with our reliable allies to press the US, Israel and Iran to scale back hostilities? And will the Minister commit to seek agreement in the UN Security Council on a collective approach to get the Strait open?
Well, the honourable gentleman has set out very, very clearly his concerns, but what I will be clear is that the Prime Minister has taken a clear and level-headed approach in Britain's national interest to this crisis, taking each decision as it comes and always prioritising the protection of our people, our allies and our interests, and that is the approach he will continue to take in this crisis. He's been very clear that, of course, we have to reopen the Strait of Hormuz to ensure stability in the market for the very reasons that he set out, but that is not a simple task, and that's why we're working with all our allies, including European partners, to bring together a viable and collective plan to restore freedom of navigation. He raises, as did the Shadow Foreign Secretary, the issue in relation to Ukraine. I think I need to be clear, of course, Mr Speaker, that decisions made by the United States in relation to its own sanctions are, of course, a matter for the US. We are clear that we will continue to ratchet up our own measures to bring pressure on the Kremlin to change course and support Ukraine in the pursuit of a lasting, just peace. And I would also be clear, Mr Speaker, that the US has announced a temporary waiver of some sanctions sanctions on Indian refiners to purchase Russian oil, but the Treasury Secretary made clear that licence was deliberately short-term. But obviously matters for the US are for them. We will continue to strengthen our measures. And in terms of the impact on people here at home, the Prime Minister's announced the capping of energy bills until the end of June. He's announced the extension of the fuel duty cut. He's announced the support we're giving to rural communities with the cost of heating oil, 53 million. And of course, we're continuing to invest in our energy security, which is absolutely crucial.
John Slinger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given Iran's reckless behaviour, it is of course right that the Prime Minister has made sure that our brave forces are protecting our allies and our people, and also that UK bases are used for defensive operations. But with regard to the Strait of Hormuz and any further action we may or may not take, can he confirm that we will not get drawn into a wider conflict that we did not start?
Well, I would simply refer him to the comments the Prime Minister made on this very issue this morning, that we won't get drawn into a wider war. But of course, we want to see the Strait of Hormuz reopened, and that is how we're going to work with our allies, including European partners, to bring together a viable and collective plan. But I'm not going to hypothesise about that today.
Oliver Dowden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For centuries, the United Kingdom has been willing to commit its naval resources to defend free movement on the seas. Does the Minister agree with me that now is another such occasion when we should do so, and that if we fail to do so, we will pay the price here in higher oil prices and overseas in terms of the perception of the United Kingdom being willing to stand up for the interests of its friends and allies in the Gulf? And furthermore, can he assure the House that this will be considered by the government as a totally separate question to the United Kingdom's participation in Operation Epic Fury?
Well, the Prime Minister set out very clearly the approach he's going to take to this issue this morning, and the Defence Secretary has just been answering questions on these matters just now. He set out very clearly, the Prime Minister, what steps we're taking to mitigate the impact on UK citizens and also the steps we are taking globally. We all want to see the Straits reopened. We've got to have a viable plan, and we're going to work with allies on that.
Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his detailed responses. And he will know, like many of us across the chamber do, that there are many residents across our country who are really worried and concerned about the conflict in the Persian Gulf. But can the Minister reassure me and the House that they are having discussions with the Department and ongoing discussions with Cabinet colleagues on assessing the different scenarios of the conflict in the Persian Gulf?
Well, firstly, I can absolutely understand the concern that her constituents feel, and indeed it's felt by many constituents, including my own, up and down the country. And that's exactly why the Prime Minister set out the decisive action we're taking on energy bills, on fuel duty, on support on heating oil, and of course on our continued investment in energy security in this country. Of course, Iran could stop its reckless attacks on shipping. It could reopen the Straits of Hormuz. That is fundamentally the reckless and dangerous action that they are taking, and we're going to continue to engage with allies on what we can do.
Sir Bellinger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the government realise that this nation is already at war? That we have Iran firing on sovereign British territory? That we have Russia having already proclaimed that they are at war with the United Kingdom? Isn't it time to put the whole of the government onto a war footing, or we will carry on running behind the curve as we have over this recent matter of the Straits of Hormuz?
Well, I simply don't accept his assertion that we've been running behind the curve. We've set out in this House on a number of occasions the measures that we took before this conflict happened, the resources that were pre-deployed to the region, including in the defence of Cyprus and other key allies and partners. The Prime Minister set out very clearly whether it's our Typhoons, whether it's our F-35s, whether it's anti-drone measures, whether it's our air defence systems, all of the support that we're setting in place. And that is why the GCC welcomed the support and solidarity we've shown with the Foreign Secretary at the weekend, and it's why we continue to work with allies and partners on a daily basis.
MacDonald.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister was right when he said today that we will not be drawn into the wider war. But the US President is now requesting UK military assets to police the Straits of Hormuz. This is exactly the sort of mission creep many have warned against. Discussing NATO this morning, General Carter said it is not for one of the allies to go to a war of choice and then oblige everybody else to follow. Can the Minister confirm that the UK will not provide further military assets to this US war, which President Trump did not consult the UK on, and which the UK public do not support, or that this House will be able to vote on any such proposal?
Minister.
Well, the Prime Minister has set out very clearly the decision-making process that he and the Cabinet have been through on these issues. He's been very, very clear about the need for us to defend our allies and partners, but he's also been clear that in relation to the Straits of Hormuz, this is not a simple task, and we're going to be working with allies, including European partners, to bring forward a viable and collective plan.
Chris Scotland.
Mr. Speaker, given the fate of the Russian Black Sea fleet from maritime drones and ground forces from FPV drones, does the Minister agree with me that there is unlikely to be a military solution to reopening the confined waters of Hormuz, and therefore that we need a diplomatic solution as fast as possible?
Well, I completely agree with him that we need further diplomatic action. That is exactly what the Foreign Secretary, the Minister for the Middle East, the Prime Minister, myself, the Defence Secretary and others have been engaged in recent days and weeks. He raises the importance of different drone capabilities. In terms of the wider situation, the threat we face from drones, that's exactly why we work with partners such as those I saw in Latvia just a few weeks ago to develop the very, very best in capability and to learn the very important lessons from Russia's brutal war against Ukraine.
John MacDonald.
As has been said, Trump and Netanyahu launched this war without consultation. They did it unilaterally and did it recklessly and irresponsibly. And it was totally predictable, absolutely predictable, that the Straits would be threatened in this way. And yet some shipping is moving, isn't it? Some shipping going to our ally, India, because they're not engaged in the war, because they're at peace with Iran. So doesn't that teach us the lesson that we need to bring about peace, and that should be our main and prime purpose in negotiating a peaceful settlement, and the first step on that is de-escalation?
Well, let me first be absolutely clear that, of course, Iran's regime has been appalling. It's been reckless. What they've done to their own citizens, they cannot be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon. And, of course, their reckless attacks, not only on shipping, but on civilians and of our allies and partners across the Gulf and indeed across the wider region is absolutely appalling. They could stop this right now. But the Prime Minister has been very, very clear that our decisions as the United Kingdom will be based on a calm and level-headed assessment of the British national interest at every stage.
Sir Desmond Swain.
What is his latest assessment of the threat of transnational oppression carried out by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps?
Well, I'm obviously not going to get into a detailed assessment on the floor of this House, but he will know that we have faced transnational repression threats, not only from Iran, but other countries. And that is the work that my colleague, the Security Minister, myself and others are absolutely united in doing everything that we can to defend against. We cannot allow Iran to operate on our streets in this way, or indeed other hostile states who seek to do harm outside their borders.
Paul Wall.
Mr. Speaker, this government is absolutely right to refuse to take part in this war being waged by the United States and Israel. But will he confirm to me and to this House again that actually we're going to put British interests first in everything we do, and that includes protecting the global economy and protecting all their constituents with their energy bills?
I absolutely can assure him of that. That's exactly what the Prime Minister has set out today, not only how we will take these decisions in the British interest, but also the measures we're taking to meet the needs of the British people who are affected by the energy consequences, in particular, of this war.
Brendan O'Hara.
Mr. Speaker, the government said previously that the United States could only use UK airfields for the specific and limited purposes linked to defending against Iran's reckless attacks. Yet we know that RAF Fairford has been used by the United States to launch B-52 bombers carrying up to 24 cruise missiles at a time. But given President Trump's reckless and dangerous language at the weekend about Carg Island, saying that we may hit it a few more times just for fun, what guarantees can he give this House that none of those missions coming from the UK anywhere will target civilians or civilian infrastructure?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm simply not going to get into hypotheticals on the floor of the House. What I can say is the Prime Minister has been very clear, as he well knows, the principles on which he has taken these decisions, the principles on which he took the first decision, the principle on which he took the second decision, and he's been very, very clear about that.
David Abraham.
Mr. Speaker, at a meeting last week in the House of Commons, we had a number of Arab ambassadors who attended. And they made the really clear point that the military action undertaken by Israel and the US emanated from the action that we've seen over the last 2 years, over 2 years in Gaza, and that the solution similarly needed meaningful peace in that area. So what are my right honourable friends doing specifically around Palestine, given the relationship it has to a lasting peace within the region as a whole, including within this action?
Well, we continue to engage closely with the Palestinian authorities and, of course, with the Palestinian ambassador here in the UK. And indeed, the Foreign Secretary, as I said, was in the region at the weekend and was engaging closely with foreign ministers from across the region. So we'll continue to work with all partners in the pursuit of stability and security and peace across the whole region.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. Closing the Strait of Hormuz is Iran's most predictable threat, and yet it appears no plan to reopen it was ready to be enacted. Equally, on Cyprus, it appears there was either an intelligence or a planning failure which underestimated Iran's either intent or capability. So will ministers review whether adequate planning and assessments are taking place? And will the minister also give firm commitments that direct representation be made to both the US and Israel to make sure no action takes place around Evin prison, because the Formans and other British nationals remain held hostage there, and we've heard nothing from the government on making sure that they are protected, unlike the action last summer where Evin prison was bombed?
Well, on the specific case relating to the Formans, you'll know that my honourable friend, the Minister for the Middle East, spoke on this the other day, as indeed I'm sure the Foreign Secretary will tomorrow if asked. I've been very clear about the importance of not only protecting our interests and bases in Cyprus, but also the defence and security of Cyprus. And I'm in regular contact with Foreign Minister Kombos and colleagues in Cyprus. And just for the record, Mr. Speaker, confirmed the sovereign base areas on the island of Cyprus are not being and have not been used by US bombers for strikes on Iran. But we will continue to work with partners across the region. It is simply not correct to say that we were not prepared. We had resources, capability in place, and we provided further capability and resources in recent days.
Whereas, Mr. Speaker, rather than adopting the opposition's hokey-cokey in-out policy to this conflict, does the Minister agree with me that any commitments to UK military support in the Straits of Hormuz must be subject to time-bound operational objectives? And can he confirm that the clarification of such time-bound operational objectives to this conflict are being pursued with the US Department of War?
Well, I'm obviously not going to go into specific details of specific conversations, but what I can say is the Prime Minister has been very, very clear about the way he approaches these issues, which is in the national interest, in the British national interest, in a calm, level-headed way, in a lawful way, and in interests of our people and our allies. And the opposition have been all over the place on this, and the other party that is not here, the other party, again, Mr. Speaker, conscious by their absence, of course, is the Reform Party, not even here in the chamber.
Vicky Slade.
Speaker, the US President has suggested that the future of NATO may depend on how countries fall into line, supporting him in reopening the shipping channel. Does the Minister believe it's acceptable for this type of pressure to be applied on sovereign nations when there is still no evidence that this war has a legal basis or a plan?
Mr. Speaker, this country remains absolutely committed to NATO, a NATO-first policy, and the President has made very, very clear his commitment to Article 5 and to NATO. That's not in any doubt. What I will say is that we continue, as I've said, to engage with allies, including European partners, on viable and credible options to reopen the Straits of Hormuz, but I'm not going to go into further details at this time.
Mr.
Speaker, the reality is it's Trump's warmongering and illegal war which not only risks plunging the Middle East into a dangerous conflict, but is now impacting people here at home. Does the Minister accept that the only lasting way and right way forward is continue to push for de-escalation and an immediate end to this illegal war?
Well, I completely agree with him that we need a swift resolution. We all want to see peace and stability and security in the region. Of course, Iran could end this by ending its reckless attacks on shipping, on allies in the region, on civilians, and they could do that right now.
Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, the problem we've got here, surely, is that the government, having decided not to be involved in this, and then literally a day later deciding that they would be involved by granting the bases to America, has brought us into a war. Like it or not, that's where we are. I don't understand what the wider war means when we are in the war, and that's the Strait of Hormuz right now. And surely that means the reason for not knowing, dancing along a sort of tautological tap dance that the government's playing on words, is a reality that they have no idea what they should have been doing because they didn't want to be here in the first place. But they are. So the question really is surely to the Minister concerned, be honest. We are in the war. What are we going to do about the Strait of Hormuz and what assets will we put there?
I've been very clear, Mr. Speaker. We have to reopen the Strait of Hormuz to ensure stability in the market, but that is not a simple task. I think to suggest that it is simple would be not doing judgment. No, but in terms of the tenor of the questions that have been asked, and as I said, we are working with all of our allies, including European partners, to bring together a viable and collective plan.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. The Shadow Secretary of State said in her remarks that this was a moment for Britain to stand tall, and I agree with her. And that's why I was pleased to see the Prime Minister and this government stand strong instead of running blindly into another Middle East war with no clear plan. Can the Minister assure me in this House that we'll continue to act in the British national interest and in the interest of British nationals in the region?
I absolutely can assure him of that. And I have to say, I mean, the Shadow Foreign Secretary today asked, I thought, some very reasonable questions, but I have been surprised by some of the tone and commentary coming from the opposition benches and in the media. At times like these, when we have British armed forces bravely defending allies and taking action, I would hope that we would see more unity and more coming together on such a crucial issue. These are complex, these are difficult issues, and I think to suggest otherwise, or to simply engage in simple party political point scoring is simply not the right way forward.
Dr. Ellie Chapman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister and the Prime Minister have talked about the UK being willing to participate in a viable collective plan to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. But does he really think that President Trump has a viable plan, given that he had no plan for the illegal war, nor any legal justification for the war that he's launched? And given this, will the UK instead be absolutely unequivocal that we will not give in to Trump's bullying demands and instead stand up for British interests, make absolutely clear we will not be dragged into a catastrophic illegal war in the Middle East?
Mr. Speaker, perhaps she could tell us how her party would defend the British national interest without spending money on defence or indeed by leaving NATO. Absolutely crackers.
Sure, what it's about. Sir Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in Hyndburn have certainly said to me consistently, they've spoken in support of the Prime Minister's decision not to take us into this war. But my thoughts, and I'm sure those of the whole House, are with our brave service people who are stationed in the Middle East and across the Mediterranean. So could the Minister please update the House on discussions that he's been having with his Cypriot counterparts specifically and the defence of the Akrotiri base and the wider island?
She's absolutely right, and I think all of our thoughts are not only with our brave armed service personnel in action in defence of allies and our interests, but also with their families and all of those affected, and of course the British civilians who continue to be out in the Middle East, and indeed the merchant shipping crews as well. She is absolutely right to ask about Cyprus. I'm in regular contact with Foreign Minister Kombos and with the Cypriot government. I'm also regularly in contact with our administrator of the sovereign base areas, and I can absolutely assure her that the protection not only of our bases, but also the defence and security of Cyprus is foremost in my mind and that of the government.
Sir Julian.
Some things never change in naval warfare, and one of those things that never changes is the unsuitability of surface vessels to force their way through narrow, contested straits. Over 100 years ago, the French and the British learnt this when between them they lost 3 battleships in a single afternoon to a single German submarine in the Dardanelles. So will he advise President Trump that whilst we would like to help him reopen the Straits of Hormuz, the way to do it is not with a £1 billion warship, escorting vulnerable tankers, but with counter-drone technology such as Ukraine can help him to supply, providing he has the decency to ask President Zelensky for some help.
Well, he asks a question with his usual thoughtfulness and experience, and he quite rightly sets out the complexity of this situation, and that is exactly why we have to approach this issue. We all have a shared objective. We need to see the straits reopened, but we need to approach it with a credible and viable plan, and that's why we're engaged with allies, including European partners, on this very issue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And following on from the question from the honourable gentleman on the opposite side, what discussions is the Foreign Secretary having in the Gulf at the moment regarding the future viability of convoys and other actions? And can he assure myself and the House that plans will be in place for such convoys at a time when it is safe to do so?
Well, I'm not going to get into specific hypothetical scenarios, but what I will say is that we're engaged with a wide range of partners across the region. That's why the Foreign Secretary was speaking with Gulf partners this week with the GCC. She was engaged with Saudi counterparts and, of course, has been engaging with foreign ministers there. And they set out their thanks for Britain's solidarity and engagement, not just on these crucial issues and the impact on their economies, but also in wider defence and security needs across the Gulf.
Since there is no plan to reopen the Strait, it seems that the price of fertiliser is going to skyrocket. What advice does the Minister have for farmers in the Northern Hemisphere who would normally be buying fertiliser at this time to support spring plantings, many of which are making a decision on whether or not to go ahead with those plantings, which he will know, if they do not, has dire implications for food prices and the cost of living?
Well, he rightly sets out a very important issue to rural communities across this country. And if I may, Mr. Speaker, I will get one of my colleagues, DEFRA, to write to him with detail on that question. But I think it's not only the impacts, obviously, on direct oil and gas prices, it is the impacts on inflation, it is the impacts on issues such as fertiliser and supply chains more generally. So he's right to raise those issues, and I'll come back to him with some further details.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Israel and the US started this illegal war, but Trump is now demanding that NATO allies support him in opening up this critical waterway. Yet European countries are not bending. So can the Minister give assurance that this country will not bend and that any military action we will be given a vote?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister set out the very clear, calm, logical approach that he has taken to all of the decisions that he's had to take on these important issues. I can absolutely assure her that approach will continue. We all want to see the Straits reopened to ensure stability in the market, and for the reasons that were just expressed, that isn't a simple task, and that's why we're engaged in working with all of our allies, including European partners, on this issue.
Adnan Hussain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that the British public abhors being drawn into another war, and given that some members of this House are already calling for an escalation into military involvement, without addressing the potentially catastrophic consequences, will the Minister reassure the House that the Government will prioritise diplomacy and de-escalation rather than drawing this country into a deeper military involvement?
Well, he heard quite clearly what the Prime Minister had to say on those issues this morning.
Michael Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Alongside the escalation of closing the Strait, the Minister knows that female activists in Iran continue to be relentlessly targeted by this repressive regime. Will he ensure that the work that the Foreign Secretary is spearheading in the Foreign Office to tackle violence against women and girls globally includes specific initiatives to support the brave women and girls in Iran?
Well, he's right to raise the absolutely horrific circumstances for women and girls in Iran, which, of course, have been going on for many, many years. And he knows the priority that the Foreign Secretary and, indeed, all ministers place on this issue. Obviously, the situation inside Iran at the moment is extraordinarily difficult. We don't have a full picture on what is happening there, but I can assure him this will continue to be a priority.
David Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a known that the Iranian regime will close down the Strait of Hormuz in a period of conflict. So back in May 2025, I asked the former Foreign Secretary, now Deputy Prime Minister, what would happen and what contingencies we had in place to be able to offset against that. And I quote, "I assure the honourable member that these issues are of course under consideration," and this is the key part, Mr. Speaker, all contingencies are in place. Now, listening to the Prime Minister, the Defence Secretary and now the SEDO Minister, those remarks just don't add up. So what's changed?
Mr. Speaker, I've been very clear today, and the Prime Minister has been very clear. We have to reopen the Straits of Hormuz to ensure stability in the market. That is not a simple task, and I think he knows that well with his level of experience, and that is why we're engaged with our allies on credible and viable plans.
Fresh from the doorsteps of Arthur's Hill, West Denton and Blakelaw, I can confirm that this is an issue of real concern and some fear across Newcastle Central and West, and that there is overwhelming support for the government's decision not to join Israel and the US in initiating an unthought-through war in one of the world's most complex and unstable regions. Given that the Foreign Secretary emphasised how closely Iran and Russia are allied, with Iran providing the drones for Russia to use in Ukraine, what assessment has the Minister made of the impact of the US reducing sanctions, lessening sanctions on Russia's ability to support its ally, Iran?
Well, she's absolutely right to highlight the connections between Russia and Iran, and having been in Kiev when bombardments have been going on, likely from Iranian-made drones, and having seen the devastation that they've caused, it's clear that that alliance has been in place for some time and has caused devastation, not just in Ukraine, but of course we're now seeing it across the Gulf, and it's absolutely appalling what Iran has been doing. I can absolutely assure her that we will continue to put maximum pressure on Russia economically. I spoke to my Ukrainian counterpart on this just last week. Obviously, US sanctions matters are for them, but I did set out that the Treasury Secretary had announced that those were temporary measures in relation to oil that was already at sea.
I'm out.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Contrary to what some less well-informed voices on the Conservative benches have been saying, short of putting ground troops into Iran, there is no military solution that enables us to open the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranians are effectively holding at-risk civilian shipping with missiles, drones, subs, fast boats. It's very difficult to come up with a military solution to that problem. Therefore, Iran can decide if they want to reopen the Straits of Hormuz. So will the Minister tell the House whether we are getting together with our European allies to deliver a message to the Americans that they need to step down and step away from this to enable Iran to reopen the Straits?
Well, he sets out the complexity, Mr. Speaker, of the challenge, and that's why we need a calm and level-headed approach, which is exactly the approach the Prime Minister is taking. We are absolutely in conversations with European partners on that point, and indeed partners across the Gulf. And as I said, the Foreign Secretary has been speaking to Secretary Rubio while I've been answering this question.
Tom Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has learned from the missteps of Iraq, whereas the Conservatives and Reform would repeat them. The Prime Minister is de-escalating in line with the national interest. The Conservatives and Reform would blindly follow President Trump into a war of choice. Would the Minister outline to my constituents that he will continue to de-escalate this conflict, he will continue to bring down the cost of living, and that he will continue to do that while keeping to the path that the government has set, which has brought inflation down from 3.4% to 3% and is on track to hit 2%?
Well, I thank him for his question, Mr. Speaker, and as I said, I've been baffled as to the position at times of the opposition, let alone Reform, who yet again are not here in the chamber today. But what I can assure him of is that the Prime Minister is focused not only on the international aspects but on the domestic aspects, and that's why he set out very clearly today the measures to support British people who are affected by worries about their energy bills, and whether that's on the energy price cap, whether that's on the heating oil issue, whether that's on our investment in energy security in this country, or whether it's on the fuel duty cuts. He's setting out very clearly what we're doing to support people here at home.
Samuel Wilson.
Speaker, the Minister has insisted that he doesn't want to get drawn into a wider war. But how much wider could a war which has our civilians targeted, our bases targeted, and our economy being strangled, how much wider could a war like that be? And does it not recognise that Iran has been able to close off the Strait of Hormuz if and when they wanted, using their proxies, using their geographical position, and only once they learned the lesson that that tactic will not be accepted, that blackmail will not be accepted, then are we going to find that this can't be repeated again? And what is his reluctance? Is it because we don't have the ability or just don't have the political will?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not clear what the honourable gentleman is suggesting our policy should be, but what I can tell him is that the Prime Minister has been very clear about the decisions he's made, and when it comes to the defence of our allies and of our interests, those will always be forefront in his mind, as indeed will be measures to support citizens who are affected by these issues, including in Northern Ireland and those relying on heating oil.
Christopher Vitz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his detailed response on an issue that we're all keen across the House to get resolved. On the issue of British nationals returning to the UK, and I'm pleased to say that those that I made representation about to the Prime Minister a couple of weeks have been safely returned to my constituency of Harlow. Can the Minister confirm the work the Government is doing to support the British airline industry? I had a meeting with representatives of, I had a conversation with meetings with representatives of the MAG Group last week in the area to support to ensure all that UK citizens are returned home.
Well, I'm glad, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the situation he raised on behalf of his constituents has been resolved, and I can absolutely assure him we remain focused on bringing British nationals home. Yesterday, 35 flights arrived back in the UK carrying more than 8,000 British nationals from the region. More than 92,000 British nationals have returned since the start of the war. We've chartered 6 flights from Muscat and Dubai, and we continue to work with airlines as he requests to ensure people can be brought home safely and quickly.
Mark Pritchard.
Mr. Speaker, the Strait of Hormuz, of course, is a narrow body of water, but so is the Red Sea. Of course, the Houthis have previously sent ballistic missiles and drones onto ships, commercial ships, and caused a lot of damage and disruption, again having an impact on the global economy. Thus far, the Houthis have been on the sidelines with this current conflict. That could easily and readily change. So what is the government doing to anticipate the Houthis getting involved, and what naval assets are in the region or could be deployed to the region quickly in order there is not a repeat of what we saw with HMS Dragon, given that if the Strait of Hormuz is closed, the Red Sea is closed, then we are going to see a double crisis?
Well, I can assure him that we keep a range of threats and risks under close monitoring, and of course we will always take steps that we can to protect shipping and of course our interests and allies in the region. I'm not going to get into the specifics of any individual location.
Ayub Khan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Over the weekend, France and Italy opened talks with Iran to allow their ships to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. France has limited America's use of its bases to non-combat missions only. Italy have refused to help altogether. But with this Labour government giving a licence to American assets on British bases, there is no hope of striking a similar deal to let our ships through at present. My question is, can this government confirm that it will keep all options on the table, including the suspension of American military operations from our bases, because British citizens must come first and they must be shielded from bearing the economic brunt of America and Israel's illegal war?
British citizens do come first, and the Prime Minister set out very clearly the basis on the decisions that he's made, which include, of course, the defence of our allies and partners in the Gulf, which I'm sure he would agree is important, and indeed British citizens and interests in the Gulf. I'm not exactly sure, again, what type of policy he is suggesting that we follow. I can tell him that the Prime Minister will continue to approach this in a calm and level-headed way in the British national interest.
Ben Obsojecti.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With impeccable timing, in January, the US withdrew its Avenger-class minesweepers from the Arabian Gulf and replaced them with the littoral combat ships, roughly the same time that we withdrew HMS Middleton, our last mine hunter in the region. As of yesterday, 2 of those littoral combat ships were seen in Malaysia, several thousand miles away, leaving only one, USS Canberra, which potentially has the ability to deploy autonomous vehicles. The Prime Minister this morning said that we would deploy autonomous ships to help clear the minefields. Potentially, HMS Stirling Castle, the support ship for that, only left Portsmouth this morning, so that's 3 weeks away. What is the earliest date that the Minister thinks that the Straits of Hormuz could begin to be cleared, irrespective of the conversations he's currently having with our allies?
Well, he will know that US operational matters are not for me to answer at the dispatch box. He's just had a chance to ask the Defence Secretary questions on detailed UK operational matters, but I'm not going to go into the details of specific deployments, where they may or may be, or timelines. That simply wouldn't be appropriate. This is an extraordinarily complex situation. What we need is a credible and viable plan.
Dr Alpington.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given the vital role of Lloyd's of London in underwriting global trade and in providing war risk cover to vessels currently stuck in the Persian Gulf, can I ask the Minister what conversations he has had, or is he aware of, with Lloyd's to ensure that their extraordinary expertise in this area is factored into the government's developing thinking? And can I also ask what conversations have been had across government to protect and defend the reputation of Lloyd's against, frankly, shameful attacks from the MAGA movement in the United States?
Well, I actually recently met with the Chair of Lloyd's on wider insurance issues in relating to Ukraine and other matters, which I'm sure he would share my interest in. I don't have the detail of what conversations have gone on in recent days on this, but I will happily get one of my ministerial colleagues to write to him on that issue.
Dr Neil Shastrios.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the Iranian regime will be studying carefully our actions back here in the UK. Only last month, FCDO officials attended an Iran National Day celebration hosted in London by the Iranian embassy. This was at precisely the same time that thousands of Iranians were being slaughtered on their own streets. Why were officials permitted to go to such an event? Who authorised it? And will officials be allowed to go to any such events in the future?
Very good question.
Well, it's my understanding that ministers were not consulted or indeed advised on that attendance, and this has been an issue that's been ongoing since, I think, 2015, and indeed likely under the previous government as well.
Lincoln Job.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister's come here today with a sort of pretty vague, we're in discussions with allies about making a plan, and he doesn't want to give us any more detail than that. And I can potentially see why. When he has those discussions with allies, would he please remember that the British taxpayer very kindly gifted 2 Sandown-class mine hunters to the Ukrainian Navy, and we have trained up their crews, and they are now at a NATO standard. And the Defence Select Committee visited them in Portsmouth, and they were very proud of those credentials. We've heard from my friend, the member for New Forest East, that Ukraine does seem to be leaning into support to allies in the Gulf. And so when he's having his discussions with his allies about making a plan, will he bear that in mind? Because, of course, those craft cannot deploy back to the Black Sea because of the Montreux Convention, and the crews, I believe, are there and ready to operate.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, he asks an important question. I'm not going to, for obvious reasons, get into the detail of individual pieces of kit and equipment, but I do welcome the fact that Ukraine has engaged with Gulf partners on the lessons they've learned, particularly in relation to drone technology. I think that's very, very important. But I think it is, of course, absolutely right that Ukraine's focus remains on defending itself against Russia's barbarous aggression and the needs that they have. And I can assure him that our commitments to Ukraine remain absolutely ironclad in that regard. But I don't want to get into commenting on individual pieces of kit and equipment.
Jim Allister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, listening to some honourable members this afternoon, one would be left to wonder whether President Trump or Iran is the enemy. The truth is that our bases have been attacked. Therefore, inevitably, aren't we already involved in this conflict? Yet the government seems not to want to face up to that reality. When it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, does it follow through, therefore, that we're simply going to rely on the USA to open them, or have we any plan?
I'm afraid, Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't recognise his characterisation of our response. We have British Typhoon and F-35 jets flying in defence of British people, bases and partners, including Qatar, Cyprus, UAE, Jordan and Bahrain. We've had multiple F-35s, Typhoon jets and ground-based defences shooting down drones. The Defence Secretary was just setting out the operational hours and sorties that our brave crews have been flying. And of course, we also have HMS Dragon on her way to the Eastern Mediterranean. Indeed, RFA Lime Bay also sailed from Gibraltar and is available for maritime tasks as well. We also have helicopters and other assets in place, so I simply don't recognise the characterisation he's making.
Iqbal Mohammed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is suspected that AI systems have been used to target and murder 165 school children and their teachers using US-made Tomahawks, with further double-tap attacks falling on survivors 40 minutes later. This government says violence against women and girls is a priority, yet in failing to call out this clear war crime, those words mean nothing as the bodies of children get buried. So will the Minister explain what the UK government is doing to hold America and Israel to account for these war crimes? And does he share my concerns about the use of AI to kill?
Well, the Defence Secretary set out, I believe previously, our position in relation to autonomous systems and AI. That's not for me to comment on as a Foreign Office Minister. But what I will say is that my understanding is investigations into the incident he refers to are ongoing, and it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on them at this time.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister very much for his answers and his tone as well, and use of words very, very carefully. Whilst I'm very clear on my stance on the principle of the war against the terrorist regime in Iran, I do not believe this is not about principle. This is about practicality, and the fact that my constituents on the poverty line, those who work and are not entitled to government help, and whose wages no longer cover the bills they covered 3 years ago, for those people, the government must make the right decision and secure the shipping channel. Doing so does not enter us into a war, but protects our constituents. So will the Minister determine to act in the British interest and work with our allies and secure this essential route? Thank you.
Well, he rightly, Madam Deputy Speaker, as always, speaks up for his constituents in Strangford, and rightly does so. We all want to see the Straits reopened. It's important we have conversations with allies on credible and viable ways to do that. But it's also important that we take that action here at home. That's why the Prime Minister has acted on the energy price cap, on the fuel duty cuts, on the heating oil support, which I think will be particular benefit to his constituents. And indeed, that's on top of course, the Warm Homes discount and the investment that we're putting into energy security in this country. And I hope that helps his constituents.
And that concludes the first urgent question. I'll just give the front benches a few moments to swap over. Order. Before we come to the urgent question on the Government's response to the humble address motion, I would like to remind the House that Peter Mandelson is the subject of an ongoing police investigation. However, no charges have been brought. The sub judice resolution, therefore, does not currently apply. In that context, it is up to ministers how they reply, but the House's rules do not prevent them from answering fully. Nonetheless, I know the House would not wish to do anything that risks prejudicing the investigation. So I would gently say to members that it would be helpful to exercise a degree of restraint in referencing specific matters under investigation. Urgent question. Shadow Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. To ask the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister if he will make a statement on the Government's compliance with a humble address of 4th of February relating to the appointment of Peter Mandelson as His Majesty's Ambassador to the United States.
Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I updated the House last Wednesday on the Government's response to the humble address motion of the 4th of February, after the first tranche of documents were laid in